I'd like to start off this video by saying that I'm in no way a hater of Classic World of Warcraft. I'm very much looking forward to playing the game and meeting a ton of new people in my adventures throughout Azeroth. My problem comes from the sentiment that a lot of people seem to be parroting from I don't know where, maybe it's a streamer, maybe it's just general community perception, but I feel that I wanted to make a video just to talk about my thoughts on a lot of these topics and offer counterpoints and facilitate discussion. Battle for Azeroth has been, for me and many other people, a disappointing expansion in almost every sense, but I'm one of the people who are still sub due to having a great group of friends that I can play with all the time, and I still do enjoy raiding and doing Mythic Plus with them. I feel the current expansion has many issues in the gameplay and class design, among everything else, so I'm by no ways intending to make a video defending retail and shitting on Classic or vice versa. I'm going to try and one by one go over some points and topics that have been bothering me about the things that Classic players are saying, and address why I feel it's either not fair to say or just wrong with reasons why. So without further ado, let's get started. Now this one is kind of weird because a lot of people I've seen and I've spoken to personally are pretty torn on this one. My thoughts is that Classic gameplay sucks absolute cock, but that's also a positive in some sense. I'm going to be countering the argument that it's better here though, starting with classes. I'm primarily a ranged DPS player, so you have to account for my experience or lack thereof of melee classes. When you take a look at the toolkit for most classes, you'll see some interesting choices, but when it boils down to actual combat, you press mostly one spell and then sometimes a second. Leveling is quite different, as you do need to use CC and healing and basically most of your toolkit to not die, but when we're talking about endgame content, there's really not much room to be using those spells aside from maybe Polymorph and Frost Nova and Dungeons, and with the occasional fight, Trank Shot and maybe Decurse. When it comes to melee classes, in my limited experience, there is for sure more to do, but it still plays quite slowly. Healing is actually not very much different between the two games, aside from having a bit of a larger mana pool, but less powerful heals to somewhat compensate for that. The advanced gameplay of both is quite different, but on the surface, they are more similar than they are different. Unfortunately, I've never played a tank in vanilla, so I can't really speak on it, so I won't. Looking at the raid design, it's kind of hard to even argue that it's more fun. I've cleared some bosses in each raid, take into account it is on private servers, and for the most part, if you don't have a debuff that means you have to move out, or you're not a hunter who has to kite some stuff, there isn't really a ton for you to do besides just DPS and don't stand in fire. And even don't stand in fire is a bit of a rarity in vanilla. There's a ton of merit to the idea that 40 people doing anything is fucking awesome, and I agree. But looking at the actual design of fights themselves, the interesting stuff just isn't really there. The environments are really cool and I enjoy them a lot, but I do find myself getting kind of bored if I'm not actively talking to my buddies in a separate Discord call or whatever. Dungeons are a bit of a different story, as it's much more active with each member mattering more, and you need to use almost all of your utility again, such as polymorphs and traps and what have you. It's not much better though, I will be honest. I do feel the need to state that I still do have fun in these instances, but it's more because of the people that I play with, not necessarily because the content itself is truly engaging. This one is a huge point I see Classic fans talk about, and it's how the old talent tree was better and the new talent tree sucks. I will concede one point about it. While leveling, getting a new talent point every level is nice. Being locked into a spec sucks, and there's no way around it. My issue with the idea that old talents were better is that as someone who enjoys endgame content primarily, my gameplay will not really change from the second I hit max level until maybe TPC. I'll respec an AQ40 as a mage and maybe swap from talent spec A to talent spec B as I hit certain gear points as X class, but ultimately the gameplay stays mostly the same. The current talent system offers many choices and gameplay variation, with the talents being changed depending on what content you're doing. The vanilla talent tree offers very, very little variation in terms of gameplay, or even of spec if you're making any attempt to not be retarded with the talents you pick. You'll do your leveling build, then swap when you hit a certain point to your raid build, then maybe swap to a PvP build if you start to decide PvP. Aside from that, not a whole lot will change. Looking at the BFA trees, while they currently are not very ideal to what the system could be, they still offer some pretty interesting choices and variation depending on if you're doing raids, dungeon, questing, single target, AoE burst, single target, really anything. You can set your talents to do what you need them to. The issue is that currently many classes don't feel that way, but that's an unfortunate side effect of Blizzard's mismanagement of the theoretically great system that is the current talent trees. It can feel weird for some of the more classic-minded players that you learn a spell and then randomly unlearn it very frequently, and I can concede that point. But adding gameplay variation I feel trumps that issue. But if you don't feel that way, I understand. This is another one I hear a lot about, gear mattering while leveling, and you can really feel the upgrades you get in the early levels. For casters, this is just a lie. Melee classes do get a really nice sense of progression through items, and it does feel rewarding. But for casters, in most cases, you won't see any damage increase from gear until pretty late unless you get very lucky with a blue drop. I saw Venruki making a video about Classic, and he said how he can really feel his spells doing more damage when he gets a new piece of gear, and people in the comments were agreeing with him. Meanwhile, he wasn't wearing any spell power gear. I feel that a lot of the community of people who haven't played the game yet like to say how much more gear really matters in Classic. And I'd be pretty confident in saying that playing a mage, if I use slows properly, I could level completely naked until maybe level 40. For other classes, the only thing that really inhibits them is just the raw armor reducing damage taken. A lot of other gear doesn't really mean anything. Endgame, it's a different story. You do feel the upgrades, but it's more just about how long you keep the gear you have. And there's an argument to be made that having the same boots or legs or whatever for 3 months fucking sucks. But I honestly feel that having an attachment to your gear should exist in the game. In BFA, I had a Dark Moon trinket on my rogue until not that long ago, and while I did feel kind of sad that I was getting rid of that trinket, it also felt really, really good to finally get a piece of gear that was better. In short, gear does matter, just not in the way a lot of people like to say it does. Running out of mana is never fun. I stand by that statement. Mana for casters is a pretty divided issue, but Classic players for sure think it's good. I'm in the camp that it isn't, but some people like it, and that's fine. Here's why you're wrong. Mana existing as a resource for damage spells creates an incentive to not press buttons, and what's fun about not pressing spells? Nothing. Do you wish you could use Fire Blast? Too bad, you'll go Wanna play Arcane? Nope, you'll go Balance Druid? There's a reason I got the nickname Oomkin. Shadow Priest? City. DPS Shaman? Bye bye mana. Warlocks and Hunters do have ways around mana, but with Life Tap and Feign Death to drink. But for most classes, once mana is gone, it's gone. Having fun toys to use, and not being able to use them due to fear of going just limits gameplay and is overall less fun than being able to use those tools. Current classes all now use their own resource, and while I feel it's maybe not the most elegant solution to give each class a resource to manage, it still just feels more fun for endgame content. I actually feel that during leveling, having to think about mana does have its merits, and it levels the playing field much more and you feel more threatened by enemies in the world. This is mostly due to the fact that while you can just press all your spells for a burst, you might go out of mana, and you have to wand that last bit of HP, or you maybe pull a second mob, and after that burst, you're now fucked until you can regen some mana. It also creates interesting choices for hybrids that maybe you want to spend a spell cast on a heal instead of damage and trying to live that last little bit of health. Now I'm going to talk about some aspects of the game that some don't like, but I feel is a very big positive for the Classic camp. I decided I don't want the video to be entirely negative because I also want to paint a more fair picture of what makes Classic so compelling for so many people. So let's get right into it.
A turtle made it to the water. A turtle made it to the
Sure, you can level completely solo, but there's also many quests made tons easier by finding some people out in the world and run together for a while. Unless you really outgear or outlevel an instance, you need to find people to group with. And if you don't put yourself out there to find people, you won't succeed in this game. I feel this to be a positive, but there is an argument to be made for the more socially inept individuals who are anxious or just feel themselves too awkward to find groups for themselves. Currently, for world questing, you just push a button, type in some numbers, and you're in a group that automatically invited you onto any realm out of possible hundreds. I feel this is extremely bad for the world and for those living in it. You make no friends this way. You form no bonds. Heroic/normal/leveling dungeons are the same way. For leveling dungeons, not a single thing needs to be said. No coordination is required. This is a detriment to the game as it's meant to be unfailable content, which is not healthy for a sense of reward or accomplishment. Classic fans will say that you don't need to put any effort to find groups to do any content, but this just isn't the case. Any queuable content is designed for retards anyways, and the content that actually requires any amount of effort isn't queuable. The major winning point for Classic is the stronger sense of community, and this couldn't be more true. BFA has so little requirement to make friends, it's insane. We have no realm individuality or identity. Realms might as well not even exist at this point. The fact that you can do raids in Mythic Plus with anyone from any realm is good for the people who have friends on other servers, but ultimately it hurts the chance of making any friends. When you have a more limited pool of players, say only from your realm, people gain reputations and friend groups will start forming naturally. You see player X in a pug one day, and then you see him again in a pug another couple days later. Maybe start talking and become friends. In the world, due to how easy leveling is, there's no need whatsoever to make friends because the content is totally steamrollable. This is an extreme detriment to a game that's based around playing with other people. You should be social in an MMO. There currently exists very little tools as well as very little need to make friends in the game. I can get ahead of the curve and weekly 10s done every week without saying a single word to anybody, provided I already know what I'm doing. I'll never see those people again in my entire life, so why would I ever talk? Now this is all hypothetical, as I enjoy talking to people, so I do talk a lot in raids, not so much in Mythic Plus, just because of, what it is. But the point is I don't need to. I've had more conversations in the world questing with random people on private servers than in probably all of my days questing doing dungeons on live. The game needs a reason to form friendships, and if not for friendships, then just alliances. We need to rely on each other in an MMO, or else what's the point of being with other people except to just have more bodies in a raid or see more people in the world? Flying kills scale. The world feels so much bigger when you have to walk everywhere, and for convenience, sure, my god, flying is awesome. But I think once again, for the health of the world, you should be seeing people on the ground. What Blizz is doing with the no flying in current content is really nice, but once we're able to fly, you bet we won't really be seeing nearly as many people around, just because they'll be all above you. Blackrock Mountain seems a lot smaller when you can just go right up and down it in an instant. The game just feels smaller when you can fly, and this also kills open world PvP interactions in the old world, which is a bad thing for a lot of people. Now, the last point I want to touch on is not really a negative or positive for either, because both communities are guilty of this, and it's the idea of classic versus retail, as if they are rival games competing, and in one sense they are, as you can only, unless you're a crazy person, only really play one game at a time. But I find nowadays it's more classic people doing this, but I don't think it's only them. You see in almost every stream that they feel the need to shit on BFA at almost every opportunity, and while I totally understand that frustration, it just gets annoying as someone who enjoys BFA, and I'm also excited for Classic to have to constantly hear something I enjoy getting shit on over and over. The two games can and will coexist for years and years to come. So there doesn't need to be this animosity over which game is better or when they both have tons of merits on their own. I'll personally keep playing the fuck out of BFA and every expansion to come, and I will play the fuck out of Classic too, and I'll keep loving them both. Does BFA have problems? Of course, but that doesn't mean we should just endlessly shit talk it. Have discussions with people. Talk about how you would like to see the game improve, because while it really doesn't feel like it sometimes, Blizzard does care. They want the game to be just as awesome as we want it to be, but sometimes things just can't happen. Classic has its issues too, but I wouldn't really change any of it. The game, issues and all, is what makes Classic Classic, and I and many others love it for that. BFA, with its many problems, is worth saving and is not too far gone, and hopefully Blizzard will take lessons from the success of Classic and see that there are things that were better, and it's not impossible to bring those back into the current game. I love World of Warcraft, and I want it to be the best version of itself it can be. Maybe I'll make a video about specifically the things I'd like to see changed, but that'll be a topic for another day. I really hope we can have some interesting dialogue in the comments section countering my points if you have any counterpoints to offer. I'll be in the comments responding to any discussion going on, and hey, maybe I changed my mind completely on some things, but try to keep it relatively civil, please. I'd like to thank you all for watching this video. Goodbye.